moderating the session today. So welcome to everyone to the fifth part of the NIUA Expert Talk series. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague Dipinder to take it forward. And we look forward to hearing you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, we have people scattered around the office who are logged in because it's a webinar. And of course, outsiders, I mean, as in guests who've come in from outside the organization as well. And afterwards, we'll give you a sense of, who joined once we have a report. But
Okay,
for
great.
now, we can go ahead with the talk. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Welcome, Sonal, Beri, and Sandro Marpillero. We are very happy to have you for this talk, expert talk, which is the fifth expert talk of NIUA in this program which we are running. The two presenters here, before I introduce them, I just wanted to share the topic of the talk today. They are going to talk about Watershed Urbanism Framework, and that is reimagining urban growth through water systems. Water has been also one of the ways in which people have documented history, but it is good that the two academics are trying to look at water to chart the future of urbanism as a continuing oral history from the past to the present. So their framework, the framework which they have developed, I assumed this is a framework which they are using or they have developed, talks about reimagining cities as part of a nature and urban continuum, and using Bangalore's Hebbal Valley as a case study, where they have shown how understanding the drainage system and the water systems of the town can help to design not just the growth, but also the aquifers, and therefore a more livable city in the future. And so now coming to an introduction, Sonal Beri is an Adjunct Associate Professor at Columbia, GSAPP. I think they can elaborate on that themselves.
Yeah.
And a design leader at NBBJ's New York Healthcare Studio. She is an architect and urban designer, has 25 years of professional experience on building types and scales, from urban design, super tall towers, iconic institutional and educational buildings, hospitals in the US, and works with urban residences to exhibition design as well. Sandro Marpillero is an adjunct associate professor also of Columbia University. In the same program since 1996. He has taught in Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Virginia University, Parsons, and several others. And he's has received various fellowships and grants. So I would welcome both the professors for this engaging conversation we have. I would request them to also introduce themselves if this introduction has been short, and then we can, come to the presentation itself. Thank you very much for joining with us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us. And I'll hand it over to Sandro to have some opening, sort of setting the stage for this presentation.
Yes, I think that your introduction was excellent. So maybe we don't need to add much more to that. So good morning, afternoon, and evening to those who have joined us today for this talk. We thank you for this opportunity to present our work to an august group of thinkers at NIUA and their extended network. Our focus, as it was just said, is on peri-urban areas, because that is where the confrontation between agricultural wisdom and urban development is taking place. Peri-urban areas present a unique opportunity to capture processes of urban development while they are happening at the very fast pace. We hope that this can contribute in avoiding the same mistakes that are causing cities to flood, also depleting their aquifers. The work that we're going to share with you today was made possible with the support of a small seed grant given by Columbia World Projects about a circular water economy model for Bengaluru's peri-urban areas. Our investigation has benefited from multiple initiatives that are going on in Bengaluru, including the recent establishment of a climate action cell. Several organizations are working towards water security, including Well Labs, Biome Environmental Trust, WR India, and Mud Foundations. They are directly contributing to this effort alongside other initiatives by CSRs such as ITC, Wipro, and AGIAM. All of them have been our knowledge partners, and we're grateful for their attention and incredible support. Wherever images were not produced by us, we have made a note and given credits. Again, this presentation has been put together for a broader audience, since an important part of our Columbia-sponsored research is to inform an educational agenda. Our work outcome will be folded into workshops that could inform administrators and curricular activities to prepare the next generation of citizens to effectively address the current and impending water crisis. So we hope that today's conversation can open up further venues in the dialogue. Thank you very much.
And I'd just like to add one other note, that this perspective that we are going to share with you today is specifically a perspective from an architectural and urban design lens. The issue of water is very complex. And there are very complex layers of governance that we don't dive deep into in this presentation, also because, frankly, it was a little bit outside the scope of what we could achieve with the small seed money that we had from Columbia World Projects. So with that, if you'd allow me to share our screen.
Yes, please go ahead.
Do you see our screen?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, give me just a minute to adjust a few things here. Perfect. All right. So cities have been planned around water for centuries. We all know that. But with modernization, we left that thinking behind. Most urban water crises are rooted in modernist planning logics. And if you ask people, a lot of people have come to this conclusion that the water crisis starts at the planning level. So resolving it requires to adopt a systemic thinking through an understanding of watersheds. And that's why we are calling this watershed urbanism. We will share with you today two case studies, first of Bengaluru, characterized by a topography of ridges and valleys, and then of Ahmedabad, where microtopography had been used traditionally to harvest and manage water. But before we dive into Bengaluru specifically, we want to take a look at the larger scale of Indian monsoons that are shaped by its geography. The Western Ghats and the Himalayas bring monsoon rains, but the Palakkad Gap is an exception in the Ghats. The monsoon winds break through them, drawn in by low pressure, and it's for this reason that Bangalore receives good rainfall compared to the surrounding plateau. Bengaluru is located in between two watersheds. On the east of Bengaluru is the Kaveri River Basin, and on the west is the Pennar River Basin, also known as the Poniyar River Basin. A watershed ridge divides the city in two halves. And here in this exaggerated topography highlights a terrain of ridges and valleys. The city's chain of lakes is formed along natural drainage lines in these valleys. And here you can see the ridge line dividing Bengaluru into two parts. It's almost like an inverted bowl.
So we wanted to look a little bit at the growth and crisis that Bengaluru is facing these days. Between 1992 and 2015, Bengaluru was transformed from India's garden city to a booming Silicon Valley. However, colonial garden city planning models have replaced open land with dense built-up areas. On the left is a map with high flood right zones. Valley corridors are the city's natural drainage paths. Water collects in these low-lying areas. This is where flooding occurs, as in the case of Kendriawar and Manyata Tech Park. Drainage channels are at best covered up and built over, or at worst, they become open sewers. Hard concrete linings prevent water percolation, leading to blockages and flooding. The rejuvenation of Jakur Lake has introduced an STP and wetland. Yet, untreated sewage will enter in the surface still. Contamination will persist, we believe, unless all feeder channels are fixed. Our work that we're presenting today aims to integrate watershed thinking into the planning process. Highway number 44 to Kempegowda International Airport is an area in rapid transformation. The airport growth is projected from the initial capacity of 12 million passengers to 100 million annually. This places immense pressure along the highway corridor and the new metro line. The 2031 structural plan designates this stretch as C6 growth corridor of significant peri-urban development. Our focus is on this area beyond the BBMP boundary.
So let's take a moment to look at the watershed system of Bangalore. What you see over here is the Budigere watershed, where we have focused our research work. The airport lies to the north of it on a ridge straddling two valleys, each with its chain of lakes. Current planning tools negate this landscape of valley and lake chains, treating the land as flat. However, the land is not flat. Here, in an exaggerated topographical model, you can see that every depression in the land has a drainage channel that flows from higher ground to lower valleys. The drainage channels are dammed at regular intervals to form interconnected lakes, and it's the drainage channels that maintain the health of the entire system. And at a sub-watershed level, as we zoom further in, you can see that the groundwater recharge zones highlighted in blue over here also correspond to the high flood risk zones, which obviously, not surprisingly, lie in the valley areas. We often think of drainage channels or nalas in terms of their function to transport water from point A to point B. However, they are hydrological highways critical in flood control. They also recharge aquifers by percolating water through their soil. Here you see in the image on the right, you see a combination of check dams and percolating pits. Check dams slow the water, and the percolating pits fasten the rate of percolation to reach the underground aquifer. Now, this aspect of drainage channels or nalas is very important and a very underappreciated function of drainage channels. So the question we are asking as urban designers is, looking at this landscape, this incredible wisdom in the in the agricultural space, is it possible to counter the threat that within 5 to 10 years, as agricultural land gets converted to urban development, that this water management wisdom will be lost? So are there ways to keep that wisdom and design with it? Here, a further zoom in on that sub-watershed, you see that the agricultural fields are already beginning to be converted to urban development. While for now in this area, the high flood risk zones are mostly still agricultural, and sorry, I'm going to, I was trying to get somewhere. Okay, here, I'll stop here. So while for now in this area, the high flood risk zones are mostly still agricultural, however, land pressures will soon convert them to urban development if not planned well, and will increase flood vulnerability. You can see the blue area, which is the high flood risk zone, and you can already see planned development starting to happen in the blue zone. The tension between development and water system can be addressed by carefully considering topography and water infrastructure. So, for example, what if the drainage channels are treated as sponge infrastructure and protected by a buffer zone? What if they are the green-blue arteries of our cities?
So what Sonal just mentioned is to a certain degree the thesis of our presentation. And we wanted to test the thesis, again, asking the question, what role can drainage channels and lakes play as agricultural land gets converted to urban development in peri-urban areas? We propose to look at one drainage channel in the area we just looked at as a test to integrate watershed thinking into the planning process. Drainage channels can be linear wetlands and public spaces. Public parks along these channels integrate community life and can host recreational complexes. Channels can remain accessible as open maidens. Check dams and percolation pits filter and absorb stormwater, as Sonal just reviewed. Street bridges connect neighborhoods across these green corridors. In part, it's already happening. This sample of this test, as you can see, as being identified in between two areas that already have seen development. And so it is a critical moment to capture the transition that is happening between agriculture and urbanity. And we're just trying to highlight possible ways in which this process can be directed at this very moment in peri-urban areas towards a more supportive outcome. So educational centers also can be hubs for learning about urban border systems. We know that there are multiple techniques of nature-based urbanism. We are not going to get into them because I think that this is a fairly shared knowledge. We can talk about it later if you want. But in any case, here we listed just three: riparian buffer zones, drain side pocket parks, bioswales. All of these can find space within site-specific buffer zone. Of course, the diagram is general, and every specific situation, whether the development has already reached what we imagine as this buffer zone, or whether there are different conditions of pre-existing constructions that might make this space narrower. All of this is obviously something that we're just positing as a preliminary framework, so to speak, of thinking. So the AAPA master plan was issued in 2009 for the airport township and three other growth areas.
Just to expand on what BIAPA is the Bangalore International Airport Authority planning area. So it is a local planning area within the peri-urban zone.
So the master plan establishes parameters for growth, including for residential, industrial, commercial, public, and semi-public zones. It also identifies, which is very interesting, a special agricultural zone that you see just below the airport and its own respect area, and spaces for parks in the valleys, which are marked very clearly as green. However, it assumes that the land is flat, ignoring valleys, ridges, and lake systems. Its boundary, as you can see, is indifferent to the outline of the watershed that is marked here in red. And it does not quite acknowledge the difference between existing villages and proposed residential zones. You see in this zoom in the area that we had just looked at, and you see that there are drainage channels already there. We will see later then the one on the left, closer to the highway, as already being substantially encroached. The one we were looking at is the second one moving from the left in. But as I said, the fact that the master plan does not totally acknowledge the presence of the villages in terms of the finer grain articulation, also, while file topography follow topography, the fields that were there around the villages, as you can see on the upper right, roads cut through it by drawing geometries that might not have a relationship with topography and the layout of the fields. So neglecting natural and social layers creates the possibility of flooding from the beginning of any further future development. So we show that a drainage channel can become a public space. And this map that sort of substitutes the master plan map highlights that we must design for water and nature-based solutions. A survey of drainage channels identifies 4 operative conditions. The present, in blue, that are in functioning order, the partially present, with some encroachment, which are the orange ones, the not present, the not operating due to encroachment, the red ones, is the one that I mentioned earlier on next to the highway, and the one that are still being checked. This map was facilitated by ITC and their initiatives that are going on in this watershed. So the 11 channels that are no more present in our watershed, which is the one highlighted on the upper portion of this larger map of both watersheds, these 11 channels contribute to the flooding crisis. Our test case, which is still highlighted with a red rectangle, shows the potential of the 27 channels that are still present. So our point is that as one captures the development while it happens in the peri-urban areas, there are indeed drainage channels that are still operating, and they are the ones that offer the potential and and several opportunities to guide the ongoing and future peri-urban development. This is the big point that we're trying to highlight in having studied the situation of this watershed and looked at it a little bit more closely and understanding what is going on and what could be done if watershed channels were to consider as the drainage springboard, so to speak, for a different kind of development that refers to environmental issues.
Yeah, and again, sorry, Sandro, if I repeat something that you might have already said, that you see the number of orange drainage channels that are partially present, but obviously with development pressures, risk being completely encroached and erased from the landscape. And going back to an earlier point of lake rejuvenations, lake rejuvenations have to be looked in context of the watersheds, and without the drainage channels, the watersheds just don't function the way they do. So this is
yeah, if I may add, I mean, the previous example of Jackpur Lake, on the one hand, had very positive initiatives like the wetland and the SDPs, but at the same time, as I said, I mean, it still suffers from the pollution, the contamination that comes in to begin with from the other lake, Yalanka Lake, which is just above in the chain of lakes, and other discharges that are polluting the lake. In fact, I mean, it requires a high level of maintenance precisely because invasive plants continue to manifest themselves, as in other lakes that have already received some treated water.
all right. So, designing for water, what if planning were reimagined to design for water like most traditional settlements had done? What we're going to share with you next is very conceptual sketches, not specific to a site, but more specific to the system in Bangalore that we have observed. So you see here is lakes, the topography, and the drainage channels that are the site's natural forces. And these series of sketches are also imagining that if we were to do a master plan in Bangalore's peri-urban areas with valleys and ridges, how would we as urban designers approach it? So what if the drainage channels become linear wetlands where urban parks purify urban runoff? What if roads and block patterns followed topography and the imprint of agricultural fields that also respond to topography and draining water, guiding stormwater naturally into these channels? What if the stormwater drains then towards the drainage channels that are set up to purify it before it reaches the lakes? So what we're trying to propose over here is to decentralize the stormwater system, treating it at source. Often stormwater is collected in underground drains, and all those drains finally meet at a point or 2 points. And at the point of discharge, the water is highly contaminated. Also, enclosing water in stormwater drains has an attitude of treating water as a dead substance, which also has its issues. Then what if each locality, each neighborhood had an STP? And this is not very outrageously different from what's happening in Bangalore. Bangalore is a city with the highest number of sewage treatment plants right now, but the planning of them is a little bit sporadic based on apartment building complexes and all of that. So what if each neighborhood had an STP located in the valley zones connected to a wetland that allowed an additional level of treatment to the secondary treated water from the STP before releasing it into the lakes? And then what if the low-lying valley lands, also known as Kane in local parlance, are to be treated as a special zone, reserving area for urban agriculture, pastoralists, sacred groves, which used to be part of this ecosystem of the lakes and the drainage channels. All of this is essential for the ecological health of the city. And again, it's not very different in some sense from the master plan and the green belt that we saw, but I think to identify these things a bit more clearly. An STP integrated with wetlands can function as a public space. We often think of STPs as these awful infrastructure things, but they can be actually public spaces, beautiful public spaces. They can become part of a neighborhood's water management system. And given existing precedents that you see images on the right, this approach is both feasible and promising. So we move on to our second case study, that of Ahmedabad, which in contrast to Bangalore does not have that kind of topography and is also a semi-arid zone. Here you see the two systems, Bangalore lake and drainage channel systems on the left. And in the case of Ahmedabad, Ahmedabad's water management system was defined by microtopography through a network of connections that drain water towards the village talab, all these blue lines that are draining water to the talabs that you see in the darker blue zone. These connections, or drainage paths, we call them, were paths that can be traversed like Kacha Road, or channels that directed water converging towards the talabs. And every village or settlement was organized around a talab. In terms of distance of this map, these villages were located somewhere between 1.5 kilometers to 2 kilometers. So it's pretty intense when you see in the landscape the distribution of these water bodies in the semi-arid zone. And just one last point, which is absolutely incredible about this water management system, is these water bodies is what recharge the underground aquifer. And it kept the soil moist for them to grow wheat without any irrigation. And wheat is a very water intensive plant. And this region is known for Bhalia wheat, which has a GI status. They sow the wheat in October after monsoon, and they reap it in March with no irrigation for the months of growing.
Just one word. You see that two case studies are extremely different. They are run to a certain degree by topography and geology, and we've been very lucky to begin to see how the difference in setup and therefore the wisdom that for centuries has allowed the flourishing of these cities is in fact offering an opportunity to think in a broader sense what can be done and what can be found once the interface between topography, irrigation, aquifer recharge is linked to a specific way to take advantage of the monsoon phenomenon, which is obviously a fundamental component in India's life.
And here, zooming out at a regional scale, the satellite image shows one drainage channel that drains the city's main drainage channel that drains the water from western part of Ahmedabad all the way to Nal Sarovar. This I just traced one, but the landscape is crisscrossed by many drainage channels that are draining water towards the Nal Sarovar. And all of this for a slope of 1%. So it's negligible slope. That's why we call it microtopography. The red boundary that you see is the boundary of Sabarmati watershed. And one often sees a very active bird life along these channels. So they are also serving an ecological function. As an urban designer, what completely blows me away is that this infrastructure of drainage channels was laid out by people before we had satellite imagery, before we had surveys of the land, before we had any sort of way to understand the land at this regional scale. So it's incredible that the people understood it working at the ground and in a 1% slope were managing microtopography to harvest water.
Just one note. When we say Sabarmati watershed is in reality half of the total watershed of the Sabarmati River. You see the river cutting through Mehrabad, as you certainly know.
It's the lower part, yeah.
And this one here is just half of it. The reason being that we can get to the next slide maybe, that we are particularly interested in the western portion of the city, in part because it is the one that is involved with the explosive growth that after the partition has happened in that size. The change in scale in the lower two small maps on the left side, the first three are the growth since the origin, so to speak, of the city. Then we get to the hinge of the partition moment. So the change in scale in the lower two maps shows its westward spread towards the peri-urban area. The interesting thing about this map is that based on what Sonal just said earlier on, the regularly spaced agricultural villages with the yellow growth areas allowed around them are slowly, as you can see already in the westward expansion of the city, subsumed by the city radial growth. Their relative watersheds that we are highlighting here, one of them, and we'll get to it a little closer in blue, are occupied in the case of this particular one by multiple use functions shown as I said, in that particular one. You see that that is one of the villages that belongs, so to speak, to the spread of the regularly spaced ones, while others are literally absorbed and to a certain degree erased by the way in which the city is growing. The process severs the relationship between each village, its ring of allowed growth, and their water management traditions.
Yeah, and I don't know if you can see our cursor, but these donuts, the yellow-orange donuts with a dark brown center are the villages. With the yellow is the zone of expansion reserved for each village. So you can see how evenly spaced they are in the landscape.
So the city's town planning mechanism, which is called TP schemes, converts agricultural plots into developable lots through land pooling. Land pooling sets up a very positive opportunity on the one hand by reorganizing the fragmented property ownership. They get to be redistributed on the basis of regularized outlines and traffic-oriented street grids. You see in the four maps on the left side the transition from the fields as they are to the reorganized. It is an interesting process where, you know, percentages, advantages are calculated, and and therefore there is an equitable approach in the way in which eventually the land is redistributed with 60% left for the private development, while 40% is allotted to the public. So the quantitative redistribution of surfaces that splits the 40% assigned to public areas qualifies it further between roads and public purpose lots, 20% each. Unfortunately, public space is fragmented, as you can see in the map in green, and scattered along different blocks. So it does not coalesce into a connective system that would acknowledge topography and its water drainage lines. So the process of lakes disappearance in 20 years in Mehrabad from 650 to 120 or so is due to lack of surface water. Lakes are infilled with garbage, and their erasure creates new land for real estate housing clusters. You see the 6 images, the progression from 2001 to 2020 of the way in which gradually the lake has been filled up and eventually a cluster of residential units is being created. It's interesting that the city at the same time takes action and reclaims the edges of lakes at times for public use. However, in the process of beautification, because at the end of the day, these lakes become a real estate asset for the development that happens around them, the new concrete embankments that are built somehow, according to the same logic of heavy infrastructure with concrete, kill the fragile ecosystem that enliven the fluctuating thresholds of the lakes. And those are the fundamental components, to a certain degree, like the strategy we were highlighting for the drainage channels, that support both life and the treatment of possible contaminations that happen in the discharges towards these renewed lakes. So we bring in here, just to wrap up, some work that we've been doing at Columbia University. One of our Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation, this is GSAPP, Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation. So we ran design studios there. One of them shows the village of Godavi as case studies because it is at the frontier of peri-urbanity, as you can see, literally, surrounded still by villages with their sort of regularly spaced, and at the same time, villages that are being absorbed by the growth of the city. So you see here in blue, the watershed of Godavi, corresponding also to the village boundary, consistently so. A framework of watershed consideration, we think, is necessary to reactivate water harvesting through historical water paths. They are highlighted here, you see, in relation with ponds that are then connected with the drainage lines. Their course can support the creation of public space connections converging towards the village's talas. The city's main drainage channel that you see highlighted diagonally coming in, the one that Sonal was talking about before, is a key component in this system because of its regional reach, reaching the Nal Sarovar bird sanctuary. So a current TP scheme that is being implemented actually right now includes a large new university campus. You see it in pink in the middle. Its reach, as you can see, extends westward beyond the edge of the Narmada Canal branch and sealing, to a certain degree, the village growth area. The large-scale national freight corridor to the east and its related train line to the north are complemented by the new road grids that is being laid out. And you see that in orange in this map, while the sort of the train components, whether they are sort of public for people or for goods, are the one in reds. So in any case, these infrastructures frame Godhavi growth area, interrupting the water channels that flowed from the fields towards the village 4 talas. They were actually 4 talas because of the size of the watershed that was pertinence of this particular village. So our studio explored multiple strategies to reconsider the village talas as publicly accessible water bodies. Different students' projects address residential, commercial, educational, and water treatment functions. And overall, they introduce a new connective network of site-specific interventions that feed into the existing urban drainage channels. So we're briefly focusing here on 2 projects, number 1 and number 2, 2A and 2B. This is number 1, which creates an animal sanctuary within the area bound by the massive embankments of the freight corridors, which are literally 20 meters high. They're incredibly high because of the way in which, trains carry their own, load piled up in 2 containers on top of each car. Therefore, the intersection between the transversal pre-existing line and these new freight corridors creates incredibly high embankment. So this embankment clearly cut off any relationship with the land. So a new circle of water-related bodies and connections with the drainage channels supports, in the case of this project, non-human inhabitation. So one of the historical lines of water management feeds a rich ecosystem in an area severed off from agricultural use for an animal sanctuary. You see at the bottom a section, a schematic section that shows what the student identifies as a possible animal hospital that would serve the whole area at the regional scale, and which bridges and crosses both the drainage channel and the road that goes alongside, somehow establishing the connection at the scale of the embankments that enclose this particular area.
And the second project that you see on the screen here retraces the drainage paths that cross the TP scheme's grid of streets, establishing them as green-blue networks. The paths connect 2 strategic sites of water management with each other. Site 2A, the sample condition, is an intersection of Narmada Canal branch and the drainage channel going through it. And site 2B is an existing pond in the university's campus that the student chose to reconnect with the village talav because they were originally connected through drainage paths that can act as public connections. The first site is conceived as a public space at the connection between Narmada Canal's branch and the city's main drainage channel. Here, landscaped with terraces and an educational center, it recalls the role of historical kunds celebrating water. So how can this water infrastructure actually become public spaces, which is what it used to be historically? The second side challenges the campus's master plan that you see on the left, where the talav is constrained with hard geometric edges to become just a beautified pond. Instead, it envisions the talav with its network of drainage channels, because you can't have a water body without the drainage channels, respecting its soft edges that support aquatic life. It also reorients the campus's new buildings towards the talav as opposed to facing their back in the first image on the left, making it the center of campus life as an educational classroom.
Oh, sorry if I
Yeah,
see if we can go back. I mean,
sorry. Yeah.
as another minor detail, this project tries to sort of complement the pattern of development of the street grids, simply intersecting it with these other lines. And in fact, it also includes, as you see on the lower right, the connection with a water body in the center of a new residential cluster that would contribute itself to the life of this revitalized talav.
So we did meet with Auda in Ahmedabad to discuss the possible reforming of TP schemes to include topography and water management. We agreed about the opportunity of considering the role of both topography and maintaining the historical lines of water connection and vegetation. It seems that they have started having a conversation about how to do that, and conversations around green TDR. This would also support a fabric for public spaces complementing the grid of new urban development. And so just to summarize our presentation today, 4 points. First, a lack of watershed thinking in lake rejuvenation is in itself ineffectual. Drainage channels are to lakes like arteries are to heart. Their health determines the health of a lake. And drainage channels are critical in flood control and aquifer recharge, 2 out of the 3 problems of water crisis, which is too much water, too little water, or too polluted water. So drainage channels are central to that, and they should be considered as essential infrastructure in water management. And lastly, this framework can update conventional approaches to infrastructure as monofunctional assets in public development. And we also wanted to put this slide in because we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And the crisis that we are facing really beckons us to rethink how we have been designing and planning our cities. And this presentation, as we said in the very beginning, could not have been possible without the support of our knowledge partners, Well Labs, ITC Limited, WRI, Dr. Champaka Rajgopal, Biome Environmental Trust, and of course, Columbia Global Center Mumbai that facilitated this presentation today. And also a big shout out to our research assistant, Dat Patel, who's been working with us tirelessly on this.
And with this, I think we wrap it up. Thank you. Thank you very much for your patience with this presentation that maybe has been a little bit too long, but hopefully can sponsor a nice conversation. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you both, Sandro and Sonal. What was really interesting was the contrast in these 2 cities which you presented. Most of my team here, we are in the climate change team, so we are familiar with the landscape, but the visual presentation was quite powerful. I mean, especially the Bangalore one, the fact that the water runs through the valleys and it's captured in different lakes on the path versus what happens in Ahmedabad, where it's relatively 1% slope, flat plain, essentially, and water tends to find its way also, and therefore the various channels there as compared to the one single channel in Bangalore. One of the questions which keeps coming up, and we will open it up now for people to respond, but one of the questions which was coming to my mind was, as cities expand, especially like Bangalore and these larger drainage channels, which are the pathways of the rivers, one could say, they are essentially recipients of the minor channels, which you did show in the Bangalore case. And you said those 22 drains versus the 11 ones, where your proposed watershed urbanism plan was developed. Now, the way the main drain or the main pathway in the valley, that is essentially become a road in Bangalore. So essentially, these get flooded because these were the paths which have become roads now.
Correct.
And
Correct.
the same thing is not there in Ahmedabad to that extent, that the challenge. There, the water is, concentrating in different parts, wherever it is blocked, and it spreads around that place. So in terms of a future strategy, and if we look at Delhi, because our team is currently working on the flooding issue of Delhi, what is happening is that these large drains and, in Delhi, and I'm sure there would be large drains in Ahmedabad also, which enter Sabarmati at some point. That is not your, area of study at this case. But the way urbanization has happened is that the large drains are the only drains which remain now. And that is the example of Delhi. In Bangalore, they have finished that also and made roads. And that is the kind of situation we are in India in different kinds of cities. And that poses a very different challenge in Delhi as compared to, say, Bangalore or Ahmedabad, where Sabarmati is essentially a recovered lake now. It's not even a river, it's a lake which gets Narmada water. But for us, it's still a Himalayan, river, Yamuna, which comes on Delhi. And therefore, the topography and the way watershed urbanism can be also conceptualized in different, types of cities and regions. And coastal areas are again very different. So I think it's a very interesting subject to be engaged with. Thank you very much for presenting it, and I would open it up for any responses and questions. And Mukta, you can take them then.
Do you want to respond to Mr. Kapoor before I ask the next set of questions?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. In fact, the drainage channel that we showed in Ahmedabad, as we speak, is going underground and being concretized and for road expansion. And maybe it's not flooding now, but eventually it'll flood. So there is the issue of flooding. But the other thing which most cities are facing is groundwater is depleting. And the role of drainage channels in aquifer recharge is so critical that we never talk about. So I hope that we can really drill into this point, because if you just see drainage channels as arteries to transport water, sure, you can encase it in a concrete pipe and put it under a road. But that also makes the water quality by the time it gets discharged to the Sabarmati or the Nal Sarovar or the Yamuna or the lakes in the case of Bangalore to be so toxic, so full of contaminants. You could have instead, planned the drainage channels to filter the water along the course and also recharge the underground aquifer. So I'm not offering a solution to what you just spoke about. What do we do now that the roads have been built over these drainage channels? But I can tell you from here in New York, a lot of places are being identified where there were roads over creeks that are now being broken over and reconverted. It's a project of daylighting the creeks, and so you reconvert them into ecological and public spaces. So maybe there are opportunities in parts, if not the whole stretch of roadways. But again, our focus in peri-urban areas is precisely to not repeat these mistakes that we have done in cities, and they are still happening in the peri-urban areas as we are studying and making this presentation.
If I may, the focus on topography means that we use the word drainage channel, but in reality, there is a sort of a hierarchy among them. For example, in Bangalore, the channels that connect the lakes are then fed by, say, secondary drainage channel, which themselves gather the water from the topography. And the same in Mehrabad. So the main drainage channel, the one that we identified at the regional scale, has been fed by the secondary ones that were converging towards the talas. And the talas at times were included in the sort of trace of the one that operates at the region. So what I'm saying is that attention to topography would allow to establish a layering, a contribution at progressive scales of how water can be identified and eventually opportunities for treatment along the way, alongside the stopping of, obviously solid waste, which is another issue, but every check dam in a way could also offer the opportunity to maintenance.
Thank you. Let's take
Thanks.
some
Yeah, we'll take some
questions.
questions. I really like the word daylighting, Sonal. So that's what I'm going to take away. But we have Sangeeta Mohanty who's in the audience, and she has a slightly different question, and she's speaking in the context of Mumbai, which also now floods regularly during the monsoon. And her question is, and I'll read it verbatim: this may be out of context, but is migration to inlands away from the sea a good option for populations in Mumbai during monsoons, or could this be or could there be a solution to the flooding problem? So basically, is there like do we reach a point where we can't fix it and we have to move people away? Is the question.
Well, maybe, yes. I mean, maybe. And, I think there are conversations about climate change, forced migration based on flooding and all of that. But what is to say, Bangalore is a city inland and it's flooding. It's on a plateau and it's flooding. It's not a coastal city. I think we really have to change our approach to how we plan and design cities. Otherwise, we're just shifting the problem inland. There are so many, Gurgaon is an inland city that's flooding. So I think her question might be slightly from the perspective of migration that we're seeing because of climate change. But yet, even in inland cities, we do need to think of watersheds when we design for cities.
Well, as a sort of, I would say, almost as last resort here in New York, there's a project that we're not necessarily in favor, which is the Big U. I mean, at the tip of Manhattan, they are raising the land and making public space, essentially building a wall to protect the inland development. But at the same time, there are other initiatives that are going on, like creating reefs before the ocean hits the shore, and use those with the growth of oysters, both as purification and as mitigation of the waves that would hit. And that's being realized currently along Staten Island, further beyond, so to speak, the narrows of the Verrazzano Bridge. So, I mean, there are initiatives even in coastal city that I think are coming along and might be worth looking into as both extreme solution and mitigation of the effect of waves, together with reintroducing forms of natural, improvement on aspects of contamination.
I wanted to ask, I mean, I did see pictures of, Tanya is collating more questions, so I'm sort of filling the time while she does it. But I did see that, you were working with AUDA, and so I'm assuming that there's also been a field component of this work. And so my question was in the context of these peri-urban areas, and you showed us those maps in which the villages became urban villages because development sort of swallowed them. So I was thinking in the context of Bangalore, was actually there's a growing insider-outsider social conflict with a lot of pushback of folks who are buying into these gated developments, which are being seen as sort of the villains in the piece. And I was just thinking whether in that pushback, and you talked about sacred groves and other kinds of cultural practices, and even if you walk around Bangalore, you see a lot of bhutas and a lot of trees with all these. There are remnants of these older practices even right in the middle of the city. So in the peri-urban areas, is this kind of environmental protection or water protection of channels part of the local community's sort of ethos, or has it come up at all? Because I haven't really seen that. If I work on Gurgaon's villages, and they were very happy for the johars to be filled in and made into community infrastructure like schools and community centers and livelihood centers, and they didn't really do anything to protect their natural resources when that urban wave came. So I wanted to ask whether that's happening in any of the cities that you've studied.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Actually, the watershed that we focused on, just north, south of the airport, we were in touch with ITC and the CSR arm that has taken up a whole South Pennar River Basin water rejuvenation study, and it's quite incredible the initiatives that they are doing across the watershed, from maintenance of drainage channels to rainwater harvesting to also rejuvenation of open wells, because traditionally people didn't draw water from the tanks directly. They had a ton of open wells around these lakes, and they drew water from the aquifer and not from the tank directly. So there is a lot of initiatives being done, and with active participation of Gram Panchayats. There is also the project of using recycled water from STPs filling into the lakes, and that's a whole other complicated topic with positives and not so positive aspects. But in terms of community participation and awareness, yes, there is a lot of that. It works much better when the area is still rural, because people depend on water, agriculture depends on water. As the area starts to urbanize, those structures of society and community and commons start to fall away, and the question of who owns water comes in. And that's where I think it gets, and that's the aspect that we have not been able to completely address. The transition from gram panchayats to town municipal corporations, or the transition from rural to urban, is mostly also a handover of governance and governance of water, because water was managed as commons before, drainage channels were managed as commons before. So how do we, I think, if we can really work on and understand how we maintain or identify who governs or who maintains these drainage channels as that transition happens, I think is the piece that we would like to work.
No, we believe that is really a very sweet spot. I mean, this moment of transition, like in the test that we showed, development is already happening around there. And development starts usually on the higher lands, because obviously, farmers know which one is the good land. So to capture these processes as they're happening in peri-urban area is actually very interesting. In terms of outer, for example, the fact that the grid comes down and blocks the lines of water is the other sort of counter situation. And relative to that, again, it would not that be so difficult to inform the development within the grid in relationship with the presence of these channels, and make sure that the road grids don't block, have at least some culverts and some ways of making those as opportunity for public spaces at a smaller scale, as opposed to scattering them around.
So yeah, if we could find what is the new commons for water, that would help solve some of our issues of the water crisis.
Yeah, Deepshik. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, hello professors. This was a great presentation, I feel. especially because we were able to visualize how this hydrology is working through a network of drainage paths and the water bodies. But I'm just curious to know more about if you encountered while the students were studying here, the impact of large infrastructure on this hydrology on the surface or subsurface level, because those are the kind of components that are being, that will grow eventually from the core city to the peri-urbans, and
Mhm.
how this will impact the hydrology. Also, how much has it already impacted the hydrology is something that basically blows our mind, because this is right now impacting the situations inside the city. And
Mhm.
obviously, we can do a lot in peri-urban areas, but what kind of retrofits in these large infrastructure? Because there are cases in Delhi's peri-urban where the metro infrastructure, a long metro line, has made a pocket of neighborhood swell during rains. So they feel they experience flooded areas, which was not initially experienced before the metro infrastructure was built. So those
Mhm.
kind of flares where inside city is already sort of broken
Mhm.
because of these large infrastructure, and then that being carried out in the peri-urban areas, how do you
Mm,
think this should be looked at in
mm.
growing cities?
Can I just add a related question from someone online, Tanaya, about solid waste collection, solid waste blocking the drainage channels, and a similar question of, how much of rainwater could have been harvested? How can we prevent this kind of thing from happening? And so if you could
Mhm.
maybe bundle those responses, thanks.
Mhm. You want to take?
Well, I mean, I think that Sonal brought up the key issue, which is the maintenance of drainage channels. I mean, and what we're seeing and what we know is that check dams are opportunities in which partially some of this solid waste would collect and eventually would not be impossible to remove. The introduction of, so to speak, measuring devices in relationship with topography and in relationship with the water courses would somehow lessen the accumulation and the danger of solid waste becoming an absolute impediment to the functioning of the system. So again, this way of not concretizing them, allowing them to recharge the aquifer, at the same time regularly pooling the water and offering opportunities to address solid waste, seems to be another function that drainage channels can perform because of their natural topography and therefore how things would flow, and eventually intercepted with a certain level of regularity before it accumulates.
Yeah, and going back to the question of infrastructure, yes, we have witnessed the main highway that we were talking about that goes to Bangalore International Airport is a major infrastructure project along with the metro line coming, and it did sever connection between two lakes. So these are interconnected lakes, the water drains from one to the other, and the highway was cutting through between the two lakes, and they did sever the connection. So interestingly, what happens is when it rains, the highway gets flooded. And, the villagers are obviously very angry with the highway authority. And, they, in their own way, for the highway to do something about it. And the reason it gets flooded is because the highway didn't make any culverts to maintain those drainage channels and connections between the two lakes. So the water doesn't know where to go. So I think in that case, the fix is relatively simple to have big culverts that allow for the flow of water from one side to the other. I can't speak to the case of Delhi, but I think that's sort of the insensitivity of heavy infrastructure, that we are not looking into this system of hydrology, the same as also other mechanisms of planning, that the layer of topography and hydrology, or that parameter, is oftentimes poorly present. I won't say it's absent, but poorly present in decisions made. So yes, there is a sort of the infrastructure is affecting. But again, it's not so bad as it is in the city.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first project of the students at GSAP, somehow acknowledges the fact that those embankments are there, acknowledges the fact that those fields are cut off, and like a little bit of an extreme solution, like the big wall they're building in downtown Manhattan to protect the development and the value of the real estate. In that case, the proposal was reactivate some connections between the water channels, and to a certain degree acknowledge that we can start to think about designing for non-humans as well. Uh, the presence of this incredible bird migration that happens on the flyway and makes Gujarat a particularly interesting stopover for bird migration. In fact, there are these sanctuaries, also might be taken into consideration. And in extreme cases, like the one of the freight corridor, where land is lost to the previous use, one can think the other way around, can think starting from the lives that often are not being considered in terms of the human needs.
Yeah, and just again, thinking through the issues of planning and governance and infrastructure development, I think maybe now we have the tools to visualize these systems that were, we had a conversation with an officer from the town planning department in Karnataka who said the land is flat. And, if somebody in Ahmedabad said the land is flat, I could take it, but not in Bangalore, where the elevation difference between the airport and the lake is 25 meters. So I think in our arsenal as designers is visualization tools to communicate with people, different stakeholders, about the importance of these systems. But I think there was another point or question besides solid waste and infrastructure that was asked of us in the bundle.
No. But there's a Rohit Lahoti who's waiting to ask his question.
Just before that, what Deepshika, my colleague here, is saying is essentially that there are situations emerging now, maybe in pockets of cities and maybe in large pockets of cities as well, where a watershed urbanism may not work. It may actually worsen the situation. The traditional concept, like you presented, that let's try to create a recreational area, let the water flow and all that. But if we have already disturbed it to a great extent in some area, drainage seems to be the only option left. And therefore, this is emerging as a big problem. I'm not a supporter of that, but that is we are facing that in Delhi in many places, and I'm sure it will be there in other cities as well. So, we see this as also a problem which can be factored in. And, till you have to maybe break the underground infrastructure you have created at some point, like you gave the example of Manhattan and daylight, maybe you have to bring the daylight underground as well. So we have reached a situation in some places which is quite alarming. Now, let's just ask Rohit also. He was waiting for a long time. Rohit, you can unmute and speak.
Yeah. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you for this actually. And to be honest, like my question is, or rather my question come confusion is built on what has already been raised for the past 10 minutes from the retrofitting aspect. Because so I am working at WRI in Mumbai, and one of the projects which I'm working on is the aquifer mapping project along the Meethi River in Mumbai. And we are working with Aquadam, who is our technical partner, and Paniyak Samiti, who's our community partner. Because like we know, right, like when we do any sort of groundwater study in metro cities, it's a socio-hydrological project, right, and not just a purely a hydrological project. So I think one of the methodologies, or rather the approach which we are following here, is of course mapping the wells, bore wells, springs, whatever we can identify through community surveys, interviews. But again, that's a very different set of challenges, because really finding those borewell drillers, again, is a big challenge because it also is between the realm of legality and illegality, right? Because not all borewells which are dug in our cities is completely under the legal purview because many of them are very need based. So again, like finding that real-time data itself becomes very tricky. And then from a hydrological perspective, I think we are also relying on the secondary data, where the metro piling has been done or where the flyovers digging has been done to find the borehole logs and trying to understand the whole geology of the surface level infiltration, etc. But my question here is that as much as we are doing this, of course, whatever picture or the mapping which we would get would be very close to accurate. It will never be accurate because a lot of damage has already been done, right? Like the airport, the Mumbai airport is actually on the Mithi embankment, right? They have literally like the Mithi river is like taking a turn, and it's actually on this in the Bandra Kurla complex. So, and the big infrastructure. Now, with this sort of a context, lot of this infiltration, the quality of water is already polluted. And also the layers, it's a saline bed, right? Because it's waterlogged, it's by the Arabian Sea. So within this sort of already layer after layer which has come, the city has already been built multiple times. Even when we end up getting that aquifer map, how close to accurate will it really be, which can allow us for better recharge systems, which will actually lead to flood management? Because a lot of damage has already been done. So is it are things really hopeful is my question. Yeah.
We are designers. We are very hopeful. We
Planners
have
versus designers here.
we have to be hopeful. Um, Close to accurate is good enough, I would say. And I'm like, we have not even seen an aquifer map for both Ahmedabad or Bangalore. Most of this analysis has been through ground observation and observation of very scarce GIS data. But ground observation for us, at least in both the cases, has been very important because that's what people have been doing for hundreds and thousands of years. All the open wells located in different areas would tell you that there is an aquifer. So I think I don't know if your question is about data or if your question is about what do we do now that so much of the system has been disruptive, like having the airport
Yeah, the latter. Yeah, that's my question actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you can go in and do a big overall. I don't think you can like say no airport here or whatever. But I do think, and this is something that we haven't focused on in our work and others have, that you can identify spot interventions even within dense urban fabrics like Bangalore, spot interventions to improve the perviousness of the roads, for example, the urban areas. So yes, things are flooding, but we can still improve how much paved versus pervious spaces there are. For example, here in California, in Orange County, they have a tax if you have above a certain percentage of pervious surface in your property. And California, interestingly, has been able to reverse their water crisis because, I mean, they still have a water crisis. They didn't have enough water, but the per capita use of water is much less today than it was 2 decades ago through many, many different small interventions. So I think it's not about a big move, but it's about 100 small interventions that we can still do in our urban cities. We didn't talk about rainwater harvesting, for example, that every plot needs to harvest now. It gets implemented, or how do you check on implementation, and all of that are really policy and governance things that get to the complexity. You can write a rule, but how do you follow through on implementation is an issue in India. But I think if we were to be looking at a densely built urban area where all of these systems have been disrupted, we would try to look at those places of opportunity, which may not be very big but small, but aggregate effect of it would be considerable.
Yeah, well,
I think
we
we'll have to
visited,
close
we
by
visit,
now. Yeah,
sorry.
sorry. Yeah,
No, no,
if
sorry.
you could
Go
say
ahead.
some final words, then we will close now because we're running out of time. Thank you. And, from Sonal and Sandro, if you would like to just say something to close this meet, please.
Sure, thank you. In the beginning, we talked about how this presentation was based for a very broad audience, including education. And I think one of our aims has been to introduce the word watershed in all our thinking, not just as professionals, but in the thinking of high school kids, primary, middle. When we're talking about water crisis, what is it that we are talking about? And so, for example, what is my watershed? Do I understand as a resident of a neighborhood? For us, if we can get to that common knowledge about watersheds and how water moves through the city through this work, would already be an incredible achievement.
Yeah, and we obviously want to believe in the next generations. I mean, we have heard of stories in which the water harvesting in elementary school from the roofs and so forth, and the practices that the kids are adopting bounces back to the families to a certain degree, and so there is a potential. Again, we're operating in the zone of hopefulness as well as, and I agree with the comments that have been done, in the sort of sweet spot of things that are in the process of happening as opposed to have already happened. But development will continue to happen. So the question is, do you capture it at the moment in which it might avoid repeating some errors of the past?
Thank you very much, both Sonal and Sandro, and also thank you to Mukta. It's her last day today. And I'm surprised she's still sitting here.
Oh, wow.
Thank you very much, Mukta, and to my colleagues and to everyone who was part of this very conversational, I would say, interaction with you. We really like that. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you for your questions and your participation. It's really a privilege for us to have this level of exchange at the level at which you guys are actually operating.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Again, bye.